Thank you for joining us, everyone, on our webinar. Today, we'll be covering an introduction to Grails Multi-tenancy. Sergio will be your presenter, and he will take over here in just a minute. One quick announcement before that happens. Please note that everyone on this call is muted just to minimize background noise. We encourage you to place your questions in the chat box, and we will address those as we go. If we can, we'll address those right there in the chat box. And if your question does not get addressed, we will address those at the end. And with that, I will pass it over to Sergio.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me well?
Yep.
So welcome to Multi-tenancy. I am Sergio del Amo. I am a member of the Grails and the Micronaut team at OCI. I am based in Spain. I'm based in a small city called Guadalajara. There is a Mexico City with the same name. Mexico City is really, really big. Guadalajara in Spain is really, really small. I write a newsletter called Groovy Calamari. GroovyCalamari.com is a weekly newsletter, like 6-7 links of curated links around microservices, Micronaut, and the Groovy ecosystem in general. A lot of Grails content, a lot of content of technologies that I am involved with. Today we are going to talk about multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is a topic that is really interesting to me because at the end of the day, what attracted me to Grails in the first place is that Grails is a really great technology to build products. I like to build products, and multi-tenancy enables us to build products, enables us to create easy ways to monetize them with software as a service applications. And this is one of the features that transcends technology and enable us to build solutions for our clients. Multi-tenancy, when we talk about software development, is when basically we have a single instance of our application that serves multiple clients, and we are able to isolate the data from one client to the other one. It's software as a service applications are everywhere. For example, I use a time tracking application called Harvest. They use a subdomain tenant resolver, and they when I log in, I only see my data. I'm redirected to the domain. The same, for example, with Highrise. Highrise is a CRM solution from the folks at used to be named 37 Signals. Now I think they are called Basecamp. The same approach. They use a subdomain tenant resolver. We are going to see how to create one of those today. GORM multi-tenancy documentation is, let me show it to you. Let me go outside the full screen. Probably many of you are aware of that. If not, let me tell you, GORM is a data access technology which originated in the Grails framework. It has implementations for things like Hibernate, for things like MongoDB, Neo4j. The home of Grails is grails.org, and the home of GORM, if you don't remember the link, you can find it through documentation, and then you can find in GORM. And if you remember, the URL is gorm.grails.org. The original implementation is the GORM from Hibernate documentation. So the most complete documentation is GORM for Hibernate. So this is the link to bookmark in your laptop. And if you scroll to the multi-tenancy section, you have most of the stuff that we'll be covering today. I'm going to cover some of this stuff, and then I'm going to do a demo of trying to apply multi-tenancy to an already existing application, and let's see the issues that we encounter. Let me go back to the presentation. So there are several steps that we need to perform in order to enable multi-tenancy in our apps, in our Grails or or Micronaut applications, GORMs can be used with other frameworks such as Micronaut or Spring Boot. So I will explain you what is the part that is coupled to Grails and what is the part that is completely in the GORM realm. As you will see, most of the stuff is in the GORM realm, just the tenant resolvers, but we will get into that later. So the first step is to define the multi-tenancy mode. We will see that Grails has, GORM has several multi-tenancy modes available out of the box. Then you need to configure a tenant resolver class. Grails ships with several tenant resolver classes already ready to use. But we can create our own, and we will do in this webinar. We will create a custom tenant resolver for the Spring Security logged-in user. Then you need to tell GORM which of your domain classes, which of your entities you want them to be regarded as multi-tenant. And then you need to basically wrap your data access code, all the GORM querying and write operations using the static methods in the tenants class or with multi-tenancy transformation that we will see shortly. There are three modes when we talk about multi-tenancy in GORM. There is the database mode where we have a separate database with a separate connection pool for each tenant. And then we have a schema where we have the same database but different schemas. And then we have discriminator where we have the same database, but what we use is we use a column, a discriminator, a column in the domain classes tables to differentiate between those. From an isolation point of view, a database is the mode where the data is more isolated from each other. Discriminator is the least one, and especially in discriminators, if you are having the same database, you have to be careful not to do queries that may potentially show some users the data from other users. Configuring a multi-tenancy mode is really easy. In Grails 3, we configured, we use an application.yaml file in Grails app /conf /application.yaml. You just set the mode there. You either enter database, the discriminator, or schema. There are these tenant resolvers already out of the box. The first two, especially the system property tenant resolver, we'll see is pretty useful for testing. It basically resolves the tenant from a system property that you define. And the subdomain, it's a simple subdomain tenant resolver. If you need for a more complex regex, you may need to create your own, maybe extend subdomain tenant resolver, or just take a look at the implementation there. The cookie and the session tenant resolvers, the first one saves the tenant resolver in a cookie and resolves from the GORM tenant ID cookie name, and the session the same one, but in the HTTP session, and the HTTP header, which is really, it's the one I like most for APIs. It enables you basically to you pass in an HTTP header. By default, the HTTP header name used by GORM will be GORM.tenantID, and then the value will be the tenant ID that you need to resolve. So all of these are available by default. Some of these are only on ship with Grails. So if you need to use, you want to use multi-tenancy GORM capabilities, for example, with Micronaut, you will need to use other ones. You will see that in Micronaut we have the equivalent ones to these ones. But if you wanted to use this from Spring Boot, you probably will need to create your own class which implements tenant resolver. Defining a tenant resolver class is really simple. You just enter the tenant resolver class as a property in your configuration. The next step is you need to tell GORM which of your domain classes are going to participate in multi-tenancy. You do that by implementing the multi-tenant trait. So in this example, we have a book domain class, and we just say, yeah, implement this trait, and GORM will know that you want to use multi-tenancy with this domain class. In order to ease the fourth step, which is the one about working with the basically adjusting your data access code to work with multi-tenancy, we have several transformations out of the box that GORMs give us. The add current tenant transformation, that's the one you will be using most of the time. The add tenant transformation enables you to pass a tenant ID in the annotation, and if you want to get out of tenancy mode in a particular method, you can use without tenant. Here is an example of using these three annotations. We have current tenant at a class level. Then we have a method, the count players method annotated with without tenant. Then we have in all two teams a method that uses a tenant with a particular tenant. So as you can see, with the transformations, it's easy to enable our data access code to use multi-tenancy. Apart from that, you will see when we try to create with a real application, you will see that we will have some issues with the correct session. So apart from those transformations, we have some static methods offered by the tenants class, such as tenants with current, and tenants with ID. So if we want to, for example, this is useful sometimes in a test scenario when you want to enforce that you want to execute a particular method with a particular tenant ID, even if the resolution of the tenant resolver is different than in this example, more books. You can use tenants with ID. So let me show you how to configure database per tenant, and we are going to jump into a demo. Database per tenant multi-tenancy support builds especially on multi-data source support of GORM. So GORMs enables you to work with multiple data sources, enables you to work with multiple databases. We are not going to cover the support in this webinar, but in the demo, I'm going to show you how to configure multiple data sources. And this mode builds on the shoulders of giants of GORMs with that particular support. So this is how it will look like. You basically configure the database mode, you configure the tenant resolver class, and then you have in GORM by default, you will have a default data source. That's the data source in singular there in this slide. And then you will have, in this slide, you have two other additional data sources that you named. One is more books, and the other one is even more books. So those additional data sources, you define them under a data sources key, data sources in plural. So that's the only catch here is you will need a default data source, and when you need more than one data source, the other ones goes in the data source in plural. Let's go to the demo. Let me see if, are there any questions so far?
No questions in the chat box as of yet. Thank you.
Perfect. So we have in, let me make the window smaller. We have in Grails. So for those of you who are, there is a GitHub organization. So you go to GitHub/Grails, you will find all the Grails projects. For example, the Grails core is in Grails core repo, and then GORM, for example, is split in several places, but one place is Grails data mapping. That's basically GORM. We have another organization called Grails samples, where we have some samples applications. One of those sample applications, so I have uploaded the code samples that we are going to cover today in this multi-tenancy example Grails. So no need to take notes or anything. The code is already there. Back then, we did a webinar about the Japan Grails with yours truly, and we developed an application with several tests, which we are going to try to take this app and enable multi-tenancy on this app. So there is a question in the chat box about how the new data sources be provisioned at runtime. We have, if you go to guides.grails.org, we have what's configure data sources dynamically while using database multi-tenancy guide. That's probably the guide that you're looking for. You will see an example there. Let me go back to the topic. So I'm going to take this app. I have here this app. So you see I clone the repo. I have here the project. Let me start the project for you. And we can take a look at the project. While the app starts, we have several domain classes. Basically, these applications is the typical software application that you may have in a hotel to keep track of bookings. So we have a list of rooms. So I can say my hotel has a room 101. Then I have room 102. So as you see, the view is pretty standard application with Grails application with the look and feel of the static scaffold. So I'm gonna create some extras in my hotel. So for example, if you have a baby, you may need a crib. You may want champagne, or maybe you want water. So now if I want to save a new booking, I will say Sergio is coming on Monday. Let's enter an email address, which is actually not mine. I'm arriving on Monday and leaving on Tuesday. 2 adults, I want both rooms and water. So a simple CRUD application where we have 3 domain classes, extra, which is just has only one property name, room, the same thing. Booking has some additional things like name, email, telephone, arrival, number of adults, children, number of babies. And then we have 2 classes which configure a many-to-many relationship between booking and extra. So a booking can have many extras and an extra can take part in many bookings. And the same for rooms. Typical many-to-many relationship that you are probably used from Spring Security Core plugin, where you have a user and role and user role. In order to access the code, this application uses heavily GORM data services. If you have not checked GORM data services, I really recommend you to do that. GORM data services enable you to create a data access layer, which is generated at compile time for you by defining interfaces. So here, for example, I have, let me show you the one from room, which is probably simpler to understand. I have an interface for, not the room data service, but the plain booking data service. I define basically the method get, a method list, a method count, a method delete, a method save, and GORM will automatically create the appropriate transaction demarcations for me. So this will be a read-only transaction, this will be a read-only transaction, this will be a write transaction, and this will be a write transaction. So one of the issues that we have seen in many Grails applications is that developers, we tend to forget to define proper transaction demarcations, and data services help a lot because they take care of that. They guess the appropriate transaction demarcation with basically by the method name. So count, list, get are a tip to GORM data services that those are read-only transactions, while delete, save, those are write transactions. If you want, you can override that and define a transactional directly here. But that's in a GORM data services done for you. So a part of these several data services, we have another more traditional service, which is annotated as a transactional and has some method which basically, for example, when you want to remove a booking, you remove first the booking extra associations and the booking room associations, and then you remove the booking and you wrap the whole thing in a transaction. so a pretty standard Grails application where I have encapsulated all of the, or I hope all of the data access operation in the service layer. So the controllers are pretty stupid about that data access. Basically, they don't have any GORM code. You will not see a transactional in the controllers of this application, or at least I don't think so. And they use heavily command objects. Another thing that we did for the other webinar is we have a lot of unit tests, functional tests, acceptance tests built with JEP. So if I run the test here, the test will hopefully pass if the demo codes are with me. So soon you will see some text executing, and for the JEP tests, those will start a browser, and you will see the browser controlled automatically by the test, and they will try to emulate the user click. See if the browser, you will see a Chrome popping up now. So this is a Grails application which we can, it's not 100% tested, but we have some tests that will give us some confidence that when we transition into multi-tenancy, some of those will fail, and we will investigate why. Perfect. So let's start to configure the app for multi-tenancy. First step is we said we are gonna use database mode. So the configuration is Grails, GORM, then is multi-tenancy. Then it's mode database. Then the next one is I need to tell the tenant resolver class. So I'm going to use one of the ones that is offer. So I'm going to use subdomain tenant resolver class. So I just copy paste so I don't have a typo there. Then the next step, we need to go to our domain classes and make them multi-tenancy aware. So I'm going to say implements multi-tenancy, multi-tenant. This is going to be booking. Then in booking extra, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, now I'm going to go to booking room. In extra, and in room. So basically, I want all of my domain classes to be part of multi-tenancy. Okay, now the data access layer, I'm gonna GORM data services plays really nice with multi-tenancy. In fact, you can say add current tenant here. And that's the only change that we are gonna need in the data services here as well. Here. Here. And in the booking service. So how do you, there is a question in the chat, how do GORM unique constraints work with multi-tenancy? Does unique true test for uniqueness only for the current tenant? I don't know I don't know, but my guess is yes. So unique true actually does a database query. So I guess if you are in our example, if you are using multi-data source with database mode, I think that will be the case. So we have annotated with at current tenant. Now for the test, For a test, I don't want to use subdomain tenant resolver because I will not have a subdomain, so everything will be in localhost and the random port. The subdomain I will show you later when we start the application. So one nice way to do that is in source integration test resources. I'm going to create a file called application test.yaml. So in Grails, we have the concept of the environments, and we can overwrite a particular configuration value for a particular environment. So when you execute the test, the integration test, Grails will use the test environment, and this configuration file will be picked. We are gonna change the tenant resolver here. So I'm gonna say the tenant resolver class for this one. We are gonna use system property. So let me do the same trick. System property. So this one is not in the web package, but in the multi-tenancy resolver, system property resolver. Perfect. So let me try to open the system resolver class. So this is the system resolver class. So there is like a property. So what I'm gonna do is in the test, so that the tests are able to resolve the tenant resolver, I'm gonna use in Spock, the framework that Grails uses. There is like the setup spec method, which will be executed once before all the feature methods in this particular specification. So I'm gonna say here system set property. I'm gonna take the this one, system property name. I'm gonna say blue. And now I remember I have not configured the databases. So we don't have any blue database. So let me do that because we are using, let me remove the production thing to have a clear overview. So we have the default data source, and we are going to create an additional data source. So let's do data sources, plural. Let's call this database blue, and we are going to create another H2 database. Let's call this, instead of def DB, let's call this blue DB. And let's do the same for the test environment. So we have now two data sources configured. We have the tenancy mode database, the subdomain in the test. We have the system property tenant resolver in the data services classes that use at current tenant, sorry. And what I was doing is in the different tests, I'm gonna, since in the test we are gonna use the system property tenant resolver, I'm telling basically that the tenant ID is blue. So let me actually copy and paste this block in. So here there is a setup spec already. So we can use that. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that you are going to see when you implement multi-tenancy in an already existing application that has tests is a lot of your tests are going to fail. So will mine. So let's run them and see what are those failures, and let's try to solve them one by one. Okay, we saw an error there. Let me show that. So here there was an error. It says error evaluating expressions, room list join in. So this is an error in a GSP. This is in the book showing. So the GSP. So here we are using the Groovy spread operator. So we have a list of rooms, and we are basically doing a collect of all the names and then joining them with comma. So one way, let's try to fix that. The last one. Okay, this test is failing because it says no session found for current thread. The way we are going to solve that is we are going to annotate with current tenant the test as well. So this is a test of the data service itself. So it's not a JEP test, but a test of the data service. This is probably the same error. Okay. At current tenant here and the data service as well. Okay, let me try to run the test again to see if we make any progress. So I expect this one to fail. Let's see if the others are better. Okay, let's tackle the first one. So the reason why that one is failing is Grails uses a opening session in view approach, which basically allow us to lazy load into our view associations, but it does allow us to do that for the default data source. So when we have an application with multiple data source, there will not be an open session for every data source. That will be really not performant. That has been changed in Grails so that only for the default one is. So when we are here defining in the booking CRUD spec, and when we are saying that the tenant ID is blue, what we are basically saying is that the tenant resolver is going to resolve that blue is the data source being used. So blue is not the default data source. So when we try to do to basically lazy load something or load a proxy in a GSP, we are going to get such an error. Like there is no, so like could not initialize proxy on session. So the issues with the session. So what we are going to do is instead, we are going to do what we should have done in the first place, which is do a projection and bring only the room names and the extra names. Let me show you the code. So in booking controller, here is, that's, I believe is in the show action. So here when we have extra, an extra, what I'm gonna do is instead of bringing a list of extracts, I'm gonna bring a string. I'm gonna bring a string. In the GSP, I'm gonna, sorry, not in the index, in the show, yeah. I clicked the wrong icon in IntelliJ. So in booking, so I don't need to get the name because this is gonna be already an string. So I can, this is gonna be a collection of strings. And now I can say if I'm booking extra, and I'm gonna say if I'm booking extra name, if I'm booking extra name, I'm gonna create those methods. Let me open the. So one thing that really cool from GORM data service is that you can do JPA-QL queries. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say we have one that gives you the, I call find booking extra name, I believe and this was the parameter was booking, I believe. So you write queries pretty much as you were writing in SQL. So we are missing a join here. So I'm going to select the extra name from booking extra. I need a join from booking extra to extra. Okay, let's see if this works. And then I will need the same operation for the booking room data service. There will be booking room, booking room, booking room, booking room. Okay, okay. Find booking room name. I believe I call that. Let me see if I have fixed that issue. So basically the golden rule is if you are going to need the data, bring the data already. So do a projection and keep the GSPs or your view layer as stupid as possible. I recommend for you to, when you are, for example, in using a multi-tenancy database mode, to use, I think the error is still there. Let's see. Rooms list name that join. I thought I changed that. Apparently I didn't. Let me open booking. So I believe I edit the I didn't edit the right GSP. Another error that we have in the app is we are using domain class parameter binding. Let me show you in a second. So we got rid of that error. So this test seems to be working now. Now we got an error here, and let me show you why that is. Stop the test running. So we have here, I am not a big fan of domain class parameter binding. So I believe I have one of those. So here, I think we have two in the project. So we have here in the room controller, we have a controller action which binds a domain class, and the same for the update. If that's the case, you will see an error here. So one solution to this thing is annotate this with a current tenant, because at this point, it needs to know, it needs to resolve the tenant to bind the current, to use the appropriate session. So another solution, which is the solution that I like, is to use command objects and don't use domain class parameter binding. So here I have a name command where I basically in the save command, the both extra and rooms, they only have a name. So here, instead of having here extra as a parameter, I have a command object, which doesn't have anything to do with persistence. And then I call a method, instead of calling save with a domain class, I call save with the name string, and I save that. So I prefer this approach, but the other one is so so popular in the Grails world to have domain class parameter binding, that if you are using multi-tenancy and in such an app, you will see that error. And then another one that we need to solve is while the test execute. Let me show it to you. So this one will be the documentation is going to tell us. Okay, we are much better now. We have a couple of tests failing. So I believe all of those are with the same error. So there is no session found for current thread. So in session factory, so that's here. So in the latest versions of GORM, the flash mode changed from auto to commit. There are good reasons to do that. If you want to know more in the GORM documentation, there's a section for that. But for this simple test, you either you need to basically flash here the session if you want, for example, this check to pass. So here I have a test where I save 5 rooms, then I delete one. I check that the count is 4. So I need to flash the session in order to do that. So when you are using multi-tenancy database mode with session factory, there is in the documentation, you are warned there is a section called multi-tenancy with the session factory, which they tell you that we basically need to use the tenant ID to fetch the session factory. So we are going to do that. So here, instead of session factory, we are going to say hibernate data store, and here we are going to retrieve the session factory using the, basically we use the tenant's card ID, we get the tenant ID, and then we call get data store for connection with the tenant ID and get session factory. And now we can call session factory flash. Yeah, there is a GitHub repository with all this code. I hinted on that before. I will show you later. So let me do the exchange for the other 2 that are missing. So this one, and here hibernate data store. And the same here, not here, here. So when you run the test in a Grails application where every test was green and you configure multi-tenancy, you will see a lot of red, but don't be afraid. As you have seen here, you can solve the errors pretty easy. Also, same as I said before, I recommend to use not the default data source, because that will help you to catch errors in views where you are. It will help you program better, actually, because you will do more projections and actually fetch only the data that you need. So if the tests pass, which I hope they will do, I have configured one is failing. Two are failing, actually. Because I am not calling session factory flash. Okay. So I think they will pass. So I am gonna let them running without the Chrome test, which was passing. So we can we are not bothered by the browser. So let me show you. I have here in my computer, I have defined in the host file. So in macOS, there is an ATC host. And then you can have here, for example, I have several entries, but the ones with localhost, I have one with green and one with blue, so that I can basically, I can demo the subdomain thing for you. So let me start the app. Test pass now. Cura. So let me start the app. Localhost 8080 will pick the default data source. So yeah, if I can create a room here. I'm gonna say room in the default data source. And then I can open a different browser. Let me open Safari or Chrome. And I can say blue.localhost 8080. If I go to the room list, you see I don't see the data from the other database. So this data, I don't see this data here, the room in the default data source. And I can create a, I can create some room in the blue data source. So voila, we have multi-tenancy database mode in a Grails application, which is the one that gives us the best isolation. Let me show you now. I want to go fast to the next one. So partition is when we use a column to discriminate. So let me show you that. So in order to partition, we will come here and say this is a discriminator. We are going to use subdomain. We don't need multiple databases because we are going to need only one database. Perfect. We need to, one thing I didn't show you in the presentation, when you use discriminator, you need to tell the default discriminator column. So here in this example, I am using the default is to use tenant ID, but you can configure the one you want. So I'm going to configure the column for the for in the multi-tenant class. So let me go here, multi-tenant use. No, you can define the data sources dynamically. In the guide I linked before, you have an example of that. I'm going to call the tenant column username because I want, if time allows, to show you how to create a custom tenant resolver. So let me do that. Let me do that. So I'm going to create a column for the discriminator. I'm defining that the tenant ID column is the username column. So it should be constraints. Well, this should be. Let me go back. Static mapping. I'm going to configure the discriminator column as nullable. So username nullable true in the constraints block. And I believe, I don't know if I have forgotten anything. We have a compilation error, username. We don't have ID defined here, the username. Yeah, we are going to see how to get the space security work with tenant discriminator. That's why I was naming this thing username, just to give me some time when we do that. So in order for the test to pass, we will need to revert we don't need the session factory stuff. I just, you have I will show you the sample. So here I have two different lists. So I believe I can access here now green. I am using subdomains, so this will be the green room. So as you see, this is discriminator mode working. Discriminator tenant ID column must be always the same. I don't think so, Dejan. I think you can, in the mapping class of the domain class, use different columns. I have not done that, but I believe you can. So in order to use discriminator mode, is the same as with database. You change, you need to define the different mode here. You don't need multiple databases. You just need one database. And the extra thing that you need is in the multi-tenant aware classes, you need to define which is the column that is going to take care of the tenant ID. Can the discrimination be a foreign key to another table? I don't know. I haven't tried that. But I don't know. Let me show you how to integrate the Spring Security Core plugin. So let me go to plugins.grails.org, which apparently was an error. Spring Security Core, Spring Security Core. Let me go to documentation to pick the version. So we are using 3.3.8 here. So installation, let me install Spring Security Core in this app. In order to do that, let me go to build.gradle. Let me copy the dependency here and refresh the project with Gradle. Now, easiest way to start with Spring Security Core is you enter the Grails console. You enter S2 Quick Start in the package demo class user and role. This generates 3 domain classes which are not going to be a part of multi-tenancy. So they are not implementing a multi-tenancy multi-tenant. It generates a Spring Security configuration in application.groovy. By default, the Spring Security Core uses annotation configuration definition. So I'm going to use add secured here in my controllers. I'm going to say this controller is accessible by authenticated. Let me import the plugin one. It's authenticated. Hopefully I didn't spell that incorrectly. Let me update the room and the extra controller. And now I'm going to create a custom tenant resolver. So I'm going to say custom tenant resolver. I'm going to implement all tenant resolvers, which extends from tenant resolvers. It's recommended when you are using discriminator mode to use all tenant resolvers so that you have a method that returns all the available tenant resolvers. I'm going to define this as a bin because I want to inject the Spring Security service here. So I'm going to go to Grails app conf spring resources.groovy and define an additional bin here. So when we run S2 quick start, this user password encoder listener bin was created for us, which basically is responsible to encoding the password. I'm going to create a bin. And now I can go here to here and do Spring Security Service, auto-wired. You need to annotate this lazy, otherwise you will get a cycle when you start, and that's because Hibernate stuff. And now let me check my notes to write this fast. 1 second. So one easy way to do all the available tenant IDs is to create a query which basically returns the property username. So in our application, we're going to use for every user, we're going to have a tenant. And then I can create the implementation for the actually resolution of the tenant resolver Like this, I have a method which checks the spin security principal. Spin security principal sometimes will be a string, sometimes will be a user details. If there is a user details, we'll get the username. So this method basically returns the currently logged in user. If no tenant ID is found, then an exception is thrown. So basically a custom tenant resolver. You will have some scenarios when you are not able to resolve the tenant, and then you will throw an exception. So if I have forgot actually something, let me create a user data service.groovy, which is gonna be a class that I'm gonna use. This is gonna be an interface. I'm gonna use to save a user. I'm gonna take, this is a data service, so I'm gonna take with add service, user. I'm gonna take these properties. So this is gonna be comma, 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 comma. And then in bootstrap.groovy, which will be executed when the app starts, I'm gonna save 2 users. So let me do here save. Let's save Sherlock, elementary, user is enabled, false, false, false. Those are the password expires, account locked, and account expired. And then Watson. Now, if I run the app, and I go to the homepage of the app, I am redirected to the login form. If I enter now Sherlock, elementary, I am in the app. This is the Sherlock room. And now if I go to Firefox and I enter as Watson, you see, I don't see the Sherlock room. So there you go. Multi-tenancy with discriminator mode with a currently logged in user. So if I see Jeff is answering the question, so I wanted to hint a couple of things more. Yeah, when you are using discriminator mode, it's recommended to implement the all tenant resolvers interface. Here is the same code that you just saw. As I was saying, there is a GitHub repository here in github.com, Grails samples in multi-tenancy example Grails. This is the exact code. There are 3 branches, one for database, one for discriminator, and one for discriminator custom tenant resolver user. You have all the code that I just saw, just shown with the test passing there. So please check it out. It may help you to see how to solve some hiccups with the tests. I wanted to hint a couple of things more. Multi-tenancy is supported in Micronaut as well. If you go to Micronaut, for those of you who are not aware of Micronaut, Micronaut is a JVM framework that the same team that Grails has been developing for the past year. It has a really, it does everything at compile time. So dependency injection and AOP and several other things. This is not a Micronaut webinar, but check it out. I'm sure if you like the Grails programming model, you will find some use cases where Micronaut is a good fit. In the multi-tenancy realm, if you go to the documentation and you scroll to the bottom, you will see a multi-tenancy section. So what we have done for Micronaut is we have created the same tenant resolvers that you are used to in Grails, but these tenant resolvers are written in Java, so you can have some microservices which are written in Java or in Kotlin or in Groovy, which use these tenant resolvers, and then you can have other microservices. So you can have, for example, an application with 4 microservices, 3 written in Java, 1 written in Groovy, which uses GORM for persistence. The 3 written in Java are going to resolve the tenant, and then they are going to propagate the tenant to the GORM one. So that's another thing that we have done. We have enabled tenant propagation. So here in the sample that we have in the code is there is one gateway microservices which resolves the tenant from the subdomain, forwards the tenant instead of in the subdomain in an HTTP header, and that's used by the catalog microservice, which in turn uses GORM. So all that I have shown you here in Grails is available for Micronaut. The only thing is your tenant resolver class will be different. So the tenant resolver class in the case of Micronaut has a different package, but the concept is the same. Yes, there are some sample code using Micronaut you have in the Micronaut website in guides.micronaut.org. If you search for multi-tenancy, there is a tutorial about multi-tenancy propagation. So yeah, that's basically what we have put together for Micronaut. We have put together tenant resolvers. In special, we have a principal tenant resolver. So security is more embedded in Micronaut than in Grails, where although many people use Spring Security Core, that's a plugin optional in the ecosystem. There are many plugins. So if you use another security plugin in Grails, you will need to code a custom tenant resolver accordingly. So in Micronaut, you have the principal tenant resolver, which resolves the current tenant from the authenticated user. And you have tenant propagation as well. So I don't have anything else, but if anyone has any question, I will, of course, be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sergio. We are actually at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but there's been a few requests for the recording. We will certainly send that. And if you have any further questions, please do send us a tweet, and be sure to visit objectcomputing.com, where you can stay up to date on all of these types of webinars in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Sergio.
Thank you.